Weekly organization. So, hi guys, this is another new lecture that I've included on this program design mentorship because I think nearly everything we do when it comes to writing our programs is going to be about organizing the week correctly. And a lot of the time, if we get the weekly organization right at this high level view, it makes the sessions much easier to write, and it means that we are applying the science in a very simple way. So I'm going to, in this lecture, recap some of the science around training stress, and then look to how that applies to us writing programs and how the slots table that we're using can really be beneficial for us. So as we've mentioned in the theoretical foundations, training splits are something that we have created as personal trainers in order to help us organize our training weeks. However, with that, people can often get very rigid in terms of it's got to be up or lower, or if it's more bodybuilder based, it's got to be chest, back, arms, when really they can be absolutely anything we want them to be. The main thing we have to consider is stress or stimulus, whichever way you want to look at it, recovery, and then adaptation. And we understand this relationship between the more stress that we apply within a single session, the longer it takes to recover, therefore the less frequently we can apply that stress. So very quick recap, and hopefully you guys will already know this, and so this is just a bit of a primer. When we talk about training stress, whilst there are a number of different factors, we can kind of boil it down to how much stress that we are applying per set. So how many sets are we doing within a session for that body part? How hard are those sets? So we look at reps in reserve. Typically going closer to failure tends to create more muscle damage and overall more fatigue. And then once we understand that, that's our session stress. And then we can obviously multiply that in the week by the amount of times we apply that stress, so the training frequency. So it's this combination of the number of sets that we do, how hard we push on those sets, and how frequently we apply that stress over the course of the week that gives us our total training stress. And as we've already mentioned, there's this inverse relationship between stress and training frequency. So the more stress that you apply within a single session, the longer the recovery and the less frequently you can apply it. So if we think of this example of like the classic bodybuilder bro split, where they're doing lots of sets for a body part within a week, within a session, they can then recover for the rest of the week and then not have to train that body part again. And this is actually a very, very simple way of programming, because you can throw the kitchen sink at somebody and know they'll be recovered for the next session because they have a full 6-7 days to recover. However, a lot of this can mean that a lot of their effort is wasted because we have this sweet spot of training stress that we want to apply. And as we're going to see in a second, the amount of training stress that's needed to get a response from somebody is going to be different depending on people's trainability or their kind of training history. But if we look at this graph ahead of us, we've kind of got this minimum threshold of stress that we need to apply in order to improve. And just below that is our maintenance stress. So we've seen actually in some studies as little as one hard set per week can be enough to maintain for some individuals, and lots of people, especially novices, can gain on as little as 3 sets per week. So we have our minimal effective dose. Then we have our maximal effective dose, so the most amount of work that we can do to get the most amount of gains. And we've even seen with the studies on volume where going from 3 sets a week to 6 sets per week, just because you double your volume doesn't mean you double your game. And it's kind of logarithmic in terms of we get like diminishing returns by, yes, each set we add might get us slightly more overall gains in growth or in strength. However, it's probably slightly less compared to the previous set that we added. So we have to be very wary about that. And so this example here would be something like a bro split. And then this example here, where we're doing less sets, further away from failure, means that less stress is being applied within the session, which means we recover quickly, and we can obviously do that more frequently throughout the week. So this starts to give us this idea that it's not about training splits, it's simply about stimulus, recovery, and adaptation. And there are a number of different ways. So in this example, if we took those kind of 16 sets over the course of the week, which for the vast majority of general population clients would be too much, but just for example, we could have one day doing 16 sets. We could have 2 days per week in a quote unquote upper and lower split, but that split could be whatever you wanted it to be, because you could train, if you're training 4 days per week, you could train 4 quote unquote full body days. However, on 2 of the days you're doing pushing for the upper body and pulling for the lower body, and then on the other 2 days you're doing pulling for the upper body and pushing for the lower body. Technically, this training split would be 4 full days, but you've broken it up so each body part is getting trained for roughly 6 to 8 sets per body part twice per week. We could do it more frequently, slightly less stress, and then we could take it to a slightly more extreme end of that, where we're doing one exercise 4 days per week. And this is someone like a Menno Hensman's would more similar to his approach. But what I want you to get from this is there is very much this sweet spot of training stress where we want to be for our clients. And this is what we can think of as a session volume cap. So there is a certain amount of work that needs to be done in order to get a stimulus. So if I just dropped to the floor now and did one press up, that is pretty much not going to be enough for me to get any kind of adaptation from, and it's probably not going to be enough for me to maintain anything from if that's all I did for the week. However, if I dropped to the floor and did 1,000 press ups, not only am I going to probably have gone past my maximum adaptive volume, or whatever you want to call it, maximum effective dose, and now I'm going into that junk volume territory where I'm just adding on more stress, more fatigue, more muscle damage to recover from without getting any major benefits. So it comes to this idea that it's not just about what you can do within an entire week. It's actually more appropriate to think about what you can do in a single session. How long does it take me to recover from that session? And then how quickly can I train that body part or that muscle group again? And so we can break this down into kind of our intermediate, beginner, and advanced. And now this isn't to say that this is as hard a cut as this, but hopefully it gives you an idea of the general trend. So for our beginners, something as little as 1 to 3 hard sets on an appropriate exercise. So that's one exercise is probably going to be enough for them. And if you do more than one exercise for that body part, it's going to be overkill. You're going to move them into that kind of junk volume. You're going to be elongating their recovery times when it's just not needed. And this is why, beginners, we can do a little bit of stress, get a really good training response, train it again fairly frequently, and they can progress really, really quickly. Now, as you get more advanced, you typically need a little bit more stimulus in order to gain some adaptation. Now, I think people take this too far and they think, well, if intermediates are doing 10 sets per week, then advanced need to be doing 20. And there's lots and lots of really advanced bodybuilders like Jordan Peters, who, because his exercise selection is good, because his intensity is unbelievable, he gets by on much less sets than someone like a Mike Israetel, who's doing even very high volume. And I think sometimes we can just get caught in this trap of more volume's better, and that's just not the case. But for an intermediate, we can simplify it of somewhere between 3 to 6 sets per session. So that's maybe 2 exercises. So that might be like a goblet squat and a leg extension, for example, or a press up and a dumbbell floor press or something along those lines. And then for the advanced, you may need to have a 1 or 2 more exercises. But anything more than that, you're not getting any more benefits. You can't try your partner, or you can't try twice as hard and have a baby in 4.5 months, right? There's some things that just take so long. And this is why I like to think of this idea of suntan versus sunburn, which you'll hear me talk about a number of times on this mentorship, where if we go out into the sun, we get exposed to a stressor, the UV rays. We then adapt, hopefully, we produce some melatonin, we get some sort of tan coloration to our skin, which then allows us to be out in that sun a little bit longer over time. However, on day one, if you just decide to go in that sun for 12 hours because you think you're going to get the most amount of stress, which is then going to get you the most amount of tanning, well, we know actually what's going to probably happen is you're probably going to go red, you're going to burn, you're going to blister, and actually you're going to have probably less of a tan than somebody that did much less. So there is only so much quality work that can be done within the week. So just to help you see it a slightly different way, so that bro split we spoke about before, if it's an intermediate, their kind of session volume cap is only 2 sessions, so 2 exercises within the session. However, we did incline bench, flat bench, decline bench, and flies. Those last 2 exercises were wasted, and actually what would have been much more productive would probably have been to take those last 2 chest exercises and put them on the second upper body day. So maybe Monday was like flat bench and decline bench. Thursday was incline bench and flies. It's the same weekly volume of 16 sets. However, now both sessions are pretty much at their session volume cap. They haven't exceeded it, which means we're getting a number of benefits. I'm going to talk to you why I think training body parts multiple times is so important. If we go a little bit further down that spectrum, then we can apply even a little bit less stress each session and just look to apply it a little bit more frequently. Now, in these examples I'm showing you, everything's very even, and it just doesn't have to be that way. So there can be days when you have more stress on session 1, so maybe you have like 2 exercises, and on session 2 you only have 1 exercise for that body part. That would still equate to the same rough kind of total sets for the week. So in the evidence-based community, there is this general recommendation of, as you all have seen it in the theoretical foundations, of like 10 to 20 sets per week. And where that comes from is basically this idea that the most somebody can do when they're advanced is going to be roughly kind of 10 to 12 sets for a body part. that's going to take around about 72 hours to recover. And therefore, you can probably do that twice within the training week. So the maximum, and if you go much beyond that, you start to run into recovery issues. So we can look at this table. So on the left-hand side, we've got training frequency. So training that body part once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, or 4 times a week. And then in the columns across the top row, we've got sets within that session. So if I were to do, let's give an example quickly. If I was going to train a body part for 3 sets in a session twice per week, that would give me a total of 6 sets for the week. Now, you can start to see where we can have lots of sets within the session and lower training frequencies, and that keeps us in the green, the greeny red. However, if we start trying to do 10 plus sets per session, 3 days per week for 30 sets, that starts to become overkill. We're doing too much stress within a session to be able to recover from. Some kind of guiding principles for you to think about when you see something like this is novices. They're going to need less sets within the session as the more advanced. We've already seen that from the session volume cap. If somebody is moving towards a more biased program, so they want to improve their chest or whatever it might be, one thing we can do is either increase the training frequency, or what you might decide to do is obviously have a few more sets for those exercises within a session. So I could still train my chest 3 days per week, but I might look to train it for 5, 6 sets on all 3 of those days. The further away someone is from failure, the more sets that they can do. We saw that within our kind of stress triangle before, stress trifecta before. Typically, when we push people close to failure, they get more muscle damage, more DOMs, longer recovery time. So and this is one of the reasons why you see people doing sets that are nowhere near failure and end up talking about having to do 20, 30 sets for their glutes. Or people doing these circuits of like band walks and all this kind of stuff. It's because they're getting nowhere near failure. So the further away from failure you are, the more sets it kind of allows you. And then we also know that shorter rest periods, whilst creating lots of muscle damage, actually aren't as productive on a per set basis. And so one of the ways you can get around having too short rest is actually having to do more sets. So moving further to the right-hand side of this graph. Just another quick example here, you get the idea, right? Train a body part twice per week, 10 sets within the session, 20 would be overkill for most people. But that is where that kind of evidence-based recommendation of 10 to 20 sets comes from. It's this idea that we only have so much productive stress we can do within a session volume cap. Therefore, there's only so many total sets we can do within a week. I like to simplify things even more for us because oftentimes we're not working with those individuals that will need to do 15, 20 sets per week. We're working with individuals that are training 2 or 3 days per week. So same thing we have here is our weekly frequency on the left-hand side, so 1, 2, or 3 times per week. And then I just simplify the number of sets down to like an exercise. Typically, as an exercise, you're going to do somewhere between 2 and 4 sets. So I just go in the middle and say 3. And so what this tells me is if for a novice, I include 1 exercise for that body part within a session, that's probably their session volume cap. They don't need another exercise for that body part. If it's an intermediate, they can probably get up to, what did we say, like 3 to 6 sets. So that's kind of like 2 exercises within a session before that's going to surpass what they can kind of recover from, what's productive. And then for somebody who's advanced, someone's been training a long time and really needs a little bit more volume, maybe 3 exercises for that chest or legs or whatever it might be, that might be appropriate session volume for them. So we can see that volume cap. And then we just have to multiply them. So we'd have this idea here where obviously the more exercises I put in for a body part within a session, the longer it's going to take for them to recover, therefore the lower training frequency over the week. But if we just bring these up now, you can see that pretty quickly, like the 3 and 4 exercises on the right-hand side for a body part, they're just not going to be applicable for a vast majority of our clients. If someone's training 3 days per week, there's a good chance that you can't afford to put in 3 back exercises on one day, because that would have taken up like 50% of the session probably. And, that means that over the course of the week, some things are going to be neglected. Now, if you're doing a more biased program, that may be right. But what I like to do is simplify it even further again and say, okay, if I have a novice, or if I have most of our clients are novice to intermediates, no one's going to really be that advanced. If I get at least 1 exercise in 1 session of the week, for a novice, that's going to probably be enough to improve them. At worst case scenario for an intermediate, it's probably going to be enough to maintain them. And as we'll see later on, we can add in these intensification methods like rest, pause, and drop sets to drive up the stimulus. But after that, I've got a good combination of exercises exercises per session that I can use. So I could use for an intermediate, I could just do 2 exercises for that body part on one day of the week. I could do one exercise 2 days per week. I could do one exercise 3 days per week for a total of 9 sets over the course of the week. That'd be fantastic. And if I was looking a little bit more along that specialization phase, then when I'm looking at my slots table, which we are going to look at in a minute, I could be looking at potentially training 2 exercises for that body part or that movement twice within the 3 sessions. And I think that would be a great place. So when you're looking at your slots table, what I really want you to think about is, if they're a novice, they probably don't want more than 1 exercise per body part per session. If they're intermediate, they can probably get away with 1 or 2. If they're a little bit more advanced, 2 or 3, but then it has a trade-off for other stuff not being included. And then how frequently you include those over the course of the week will come back down to, is it balanced approach you're looking for or a biased approach? And we're going to see that in an example in just a second. Now, I've mentioned a number of times about the session volume cap and why I think that's important that we train a body part multiple times per week. But there are also lots of other reasons. Secondly, with a lot of our gen population clients, missed sessions. All right, how oftentimes do people book in, they miss a session, and then they're not training that body part again for another week? So if I've got like a leg day, a push day, and a pull day, if they miss that pull day on Friday, then it's going to be at least 2 weeks till they've actually trained that pull. Whereas if we've got a mixture of more full body sessions where a body part's getting trained twice per week in whichever set configuration, whichever training split that I want, then that missed session is far less impactful. Improved performance. So as I mentioned previously with that idea of the kind of quote unquote bro split, where someone was doing 4 exercises for their chest on Monday, simply by taking those last 2 exercises and placing them on another day, they're now fresher when they attack those 2 exercises, which means they can obviously progressively overload, which means better results. Skill adaptation, obviously, if you're goblet squatting 2 or 3 times per week, you will pick up that goblet squat much, much quicker than somebody that's only goblet squatting once per week. And if you've got like randomness within your program, which a lot of people initially do, then it might be weeks before they see a goblet squat again. And we know from this study by Chillerbeck that people basically have to get this kind of neural learning in place first before you can hypertrophy a muscle. And so if you can help them learn the movement quicker, there's a good chance you can start to help them see physical changes quicker as well. And then lastly, if I've only got pushing exercises on a day, or I've only got lower body exercises, it doesn't suit itself, or doesn't lend itself to things like non-competing paired sets and supersets, which if someone's only training 2 or 3 days per week, then I'm probably going to want to use. However, if somebody's training more frequently, then I could potentially have a lower body day. I could just do compound movements because the pressure to get as much work in a single session is lowered because they're doing more sessions over the week. So what does all this mean when it comes to you using the slots table and trying to organize your week? And if I were you, I'd screen grab this and just have this in your mind as you go through the program from now on. We're typically going to look to train body parts 1 to 3 times per week. For most people, that will look like 2 to 3 full body sessions with 5 to 7 exercises in each. However, if somebody has a higher total training frequency, so they're not training 3 days a week, actually, they might train with you 3 days a week and they train 2 days a week on their own, that higher training frequency allows me to break up the work over more sessions, because there's no point, I can't just, because the session volume cap, I can't just do a huge amount for my chest on one day. But what I can say is, well, actually, I could train my chest over 3 days. And so now I can, instead of just having to do full body sessions, I could do upper and lower, or I could do something else. But again, for that session density, I don't like to break it down too much. So even when I've got someone training 4 days a week, I'll typically still do some form of quote unquote full body, but I might start to break it down now, as I said before, into like one which is a true full body, or 2 of them which is a true full body, and then one that's like an upper body push, lower body pull, and then vice versa for the 4th day. So quote unquote, it would be a full body day, but I start to compartmentalize how I train that. So within an individual session, I'm looking for kind of 1 to 3 exercises per muscle group per session, thinking about that session volume cap that we've already spoken about. 1 exercise is going to be plenty for a beginner, probably 2 exercises per body part. For an intermediate, they'd still be do great on 1. And then for the more advanced, maybe 2 to 4. The more exercises per session for that body part means longer recovery, means lower frequency. And we don't need to be doing more than 4 to 6 exercises per muscle group over the course of a week for the vast majority of our clients, okay? So not only is there this session volume cap, as we saw, there's only so much productive volume we can do within a session, there's only so much productive volume you can do within a week, and adding more isn't any more beneficial. So for a beginner, I'd even go as far as 1 to 3 exercises per week for that body part. There's probably going to be plenty for them. For an intermediate, that might move up to like 4 to 6, and for advanced, maybe 6 to 7. But that is the maximums. That doesn't mean that somebody doing like an intermediate doing 1 or 2 exercises for a body part per week can't still progress. And we've seen from a number of the meta-analysis, like Brad Schoenfeld's meta-analysis, that they absolutely can. And one of the problems I see with people actually is that they're trying to treat a cold with chemotherapy. All right. So someone's got the sniffles and the doctor puts them on a course of chemo. We know it's too much. If a beginner or an intermediate, just a general population client walks through the door, they probably don't need 6 and 7 sets each week for their glutes or whatever it is it might be. They probably just need to get really good technique, push hard on those sets, and execute well on a couple of exercises. And we've actually seen from some studies, and you find about this, we'll talk about this study in a little bit more detail at the end of phase 1, that actually just by adding 1 or 2 exercises at most can be enough to maximize gains in specialization cycles. So when we ask you to write biased plans, typically people kind of throw the kitchen sink at it, and it's like 6 exercises for somebody's chest over the course of the training week. When actually, if they were only doing 2 or 3 before, maybe going from 3 to 4 is probably going to be enough to really start to see a robust response in terms of the hypertrophy and their strength. So just a very quick summary slide then, just to kind of help you differentiate a little bit between what is probably the vast majority of our clients training, well, hopefully they're not training 0 to 3, training 1 to 3 weekly sessions, and then those individuals that can train 4+ sessions per week. So when someone is training has their total training frequency of training 3 days per week, so let's say they train Monday, Thursday, Saturday, we're going to look to train each muscle 1 to 3 times per week. This allows us to do splits like upper full body, upper push, lower pull, as I've already mentioned, anterior, posterior. Most of the time, it's just going to be just truly full body. That means 1 to 2 exercises per body part per session. Obviously, some days some aren't going to be included, and that's fine. But as long as over the course of the week, we're getting that 1 to 3. And then our set configurations that we're going to typically look to use is our paired sets, supersets, and trisets, because we need to make sure that the work we're doing is nice and dense. Now, what did we say? When somebody trains more frequently, we can afford to apply a little bit more stress per session, because they're going to be able to have longer to recover because they're training more frequently. So here we'd say that body parts are probably going to be trained somewhere between 2 to 4 times per week. This allows us to do, again, full body. We can also do upper, lower, pushing and pulls and stuff like that if we so choose, because there might be less of an emphasis to need to have to get supersets in. Because, for example, if I'm doing a full body session, I might have to get 6 exercises in, whereas if I'm just doing a lower body day, maybe it's only 4 or 5 exercises in total, and I could just sit down in between my sets and get my recovery in. But in terms of when I'm actually training a body part, it's somewhere between 1 to 4 exercises for that body part, for a total of 2 to 6 over the course of the week. And here we can start to add in a few more compounds, so just straight sets, 2-3 minutes rest between sets with no other exercise. We can use our paired sets, which is obviously longer rest periods, and isolation. So the big difference I just wanted to see here is basically when someone has a higher total training frequency over the course of the week, i.e. they do more exercise, you can apply more stress within the sessions, which allows you to break up training a little bit more, which allows you to use things like compound sets and paired sets more, because they're going to have longer recovery between their sessions. But the vast majority of our clients, they're going to be on that left-hand side. And so we're going to be looking to train body parts 1 to 3 times per week, with training splits of full body, upper push, lower pull, etc. When we do train that body part, we're looking for 1 or 2 exercises at most, which over the course of the week will probably give us somewhere between 1 to 4 exercises for that week. That's probably going to reach their weekly volume cap. And within the sessions, because we need to keep it nice and dense, is paired sets, supersets, and trisets. So the last thing I want to talk about then is how we can see all of this information that we spoke about, all this evidence-based recommendations around session volume caps and weekly volume caps and where our volume's allocated and how long we have recovery between sessions and all this kind of stuff, simply by looking at our slots table. So what's that first recommendation? Train body parts 1 to 3 times per week. So of course, once we've got our training days up, we can clearly see down our columns which days our body parts are being trained. We can see how many exercises for that body part are being trained, and with our kind of session volume cap heads on, saying, okay, for my beginner, I don't want more than 1 exercise for that body part within a session, and no more than kind of 3 or 4 for somebody who's advanced. But for the people we work with, that will be very few and far between. The more exercises that we have in a single session, the longer we need to recover. So we saw in that previous example, I was training a horizontal push for one exercise 3 days of the week. However, for whatever reason, in session 1, I did 3 horizontal push exercises. Therefore, it's probably not appropriate to train it on day 2, and I'll do a fourth exercise for the week on training session 3. So the more stress that you apply within a session, the longer the recovery that's needed, and the kind of color coding will tell you this on your slots method table. We want no more than kind of 4 to 6 exercises per muscle group per week. So again, that's your totals at the bottom of the chart. It also identifies anything in blue, which will need probably an intensification method. More on that later on in the course. But again, it allows you to keep that weekly volume cap. So just looking at your slots table, you can clearly see how often a body part is being trained, how many exercises or for a proxy of sets that you're going to be doing per session. Have you kind of surpassed or met their session volume cap? Have you allowed enough recovery between sessions? And then have you directed volume to the right places with bearing in mind the weekly volume cap? So if we just took a quick look at some of the examples, so these 3 full body sessions, we can see that I've got horizontal push, vertical pull, knee dominant movement, split stance, and hip dominant for day 1. Day 2, similar. And I'd be thinking in my head, okay, if I'm training a body part relatively short amount. If it's only 48 hours, I probably don't need to change anything because we've just applied not a crazy amount of stress, right? We've just gone, here's enough training stress, like was in the sweet spot for your session volume cap. It's going to get you some stimulus, but it's not going to take you too long to recover. You can train again. However, if I had on, again, day 1, put in 2 or 3 horizontal pushes, maybe I'd have removed that horizontal push for that day and put it somewhere else. And then we can obviously see the total volume. So, as I said, what does our slots table give us? It looks very simple at first, but it helps us to see so much. Firstly, the weekly volume for each body part. So here, obviously, we're just looking at exercise numbers, and you can get a little bit more nitty-gritty in terms of number of sets if you want to, but for most people, the number of exercises they're doing is a great proxy for that. We can see how many exercises we're doing in total over the course of the week. So in this example, we're doing 18, and we can also see it broken down for the individual muscle group. So I can see here, my supine hinge and my knee flexion are slightly more neglected, but actually glutes and hamstrings will still be hitting my hip dominant movement, which is hit twice per week, and probably in a good extent to my split stance work as well. I can see my session volume caps, as we already mentioned. So in this example, my knee dominant movement getting close to the session volume cap on day 3. But apart from that, everything else is fairly low per session volume. I can see how close my training sessions are. So for example, horizontal push from day 1 to day 2, they're going to be much closer in duration than from day 2, all the way back down to day 1. So let's say we've got this scenario where our client can train Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, for example, then actually maybe I would have gone fairly easy on Monday. On Tuesday, I could have pushed that horizontal push exercise really hard because I know I've got 6 days to recover. So it gives you a really clear indication of how long exercises have to recover and what that might mean in terms of the shorter recovery time. So the quicker somebody's going to train between sessions. If you're programming the way we're talking about, you're probably going to be fine. But some other considerations might be that if somebody is literally training 24 hours apart, I might do slightly less sets on the first day. I might have more reps in reserve because what that's doing, that's reducing my stress over the session. And then I might also avoid some muscles that kind of train the body part in a lengthened position because they like an RDL, because they tend to create a little bit more muscle damage. So it can start to inform my program design. And then I can start to think, okay, looking at this, do I want to have different rep ranges on different days? So again, we go back to this, let's go to the horizontal push example. I might do more strength-focused repetitions on day 1, more hypertrophy-focused repetitions on day 2. Or I might say, okay, on Monday, we're going to go for more of an incline, more of that clavicular portion of my chest. On day 2, let's say it's Wednesday, we're going to go for more of a flat or a decline. But long story short, we can take all of that information on per session volume caps, weekly volume caps, training frequencies, training stress, all that kind of stuff. And we can see so much information within that slots table to help you organize the week. I really hope that was helpful. I really hope